it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Good evening, my curious friends, and welcome back to the Shadows. As always, I'm your host for tonight's descent into the strange and the macabre, a place where reality frays at the edges and the unknown whispers just beyond the light. When Tom accepts a job as the caretaker of a secluded mansion on the outskirts of town, he sees it as a fresh start for his struggling family. But from the moment they arrive, strange occurrences begin to unfold. Whispers in the halls, doors that open on their own, and a radio that seems to speak to him in voices. Macy's Mansion by Ed Bennett. Part 1. When we first arrived, Kathy called the house a dream come true. Well, I had my doubts. I wasn't so sure. It was a building of medium size, perched at the edge of a sprawling meadow that stretched lazily toward a glistening lake. On one side, a dense wall of trees loomed, their thick trunks and tangled branches woven so tightly they blocked out almost all light, forming a natural barrier from the outside world. And on the other end, the nearest neighbors were miles away, making it feel as though we'd stepped into our own secluded little world. Our 7-year-old son, George, lit up the moment he spotted a row of wooden swings in the neatly manicured garden beside the house. Without a word, he took off running, his laughter ringing across the open space like wind chimes. At first glance, everything looked perfect. The house was old, but recently restored. Its weathered stone facade had been brought back to life, and tall bay windows bathed the interior in golden afternoon light. The floors gleamed with fresh polish, the walls wore crisp coats of paint, and the faint scent of sawdust and varnish still lingered, a quiet reminder of the work that had gone into reviving it. Meanwhile, our 1-year-old daughter, Justine, remained in Kathy's arms, her tiny hands gripping her mother's shirt as she gazed up the high ceiling in an open-mouthed wonder. And Kathy turned to me with a knowing smile as if to say, "Oh, you're not going to pass this up, are you?" I simply shrugged and smiled awkwardly. The decision had already been made. A few days ago, I'd received a call from an employment agency, completely out of the blue. They were looking for a family to immediately move into a mansion on the outskirts of town and act as its caretakers, which included housekeeping and basic upkeep. Well, the pay was more than double what I'd earned at my last job, and for someone who'd been laid off and was searching for work for weeks, it felt like a miracle. But something about the whole deal unsettled me. In all this time, I'd never spoken to a single person associated with the house. No owner, no previous staff, no groundskeeper. The only person I ever dealt with was a lawyer who showed up at my doorstep, had me sign a 5-year contract, and then vanished, never to be heard from again. When I arrived at the address, the agency had simply told me that the key would be placed under the welcome mat by the entrance, and sure enough, there it was. The strangest part, though, well, the moment I agreed to take the job, my bank account was credited with a $25,000 signing-on bonus. Well, to be honest, it all felt so easy, too convenient. But looking at Kathy and the kids already settling in, I couldn't backtrack, not when I had no other offers. The house in itself was well furnished, an elegant blend of old-world charm and modern convenience. A wall-mounted flat-screen TV hung in the main living room, but what caught my eye was the old teak radio set beside it, a relic from another time, with a large central dial worn smooth and a frayed, useless power cord trailing behind it. I ran my hand over it, idly twisting the dial before setting it back. It looked more like a decorative piece than a working device, but something about it seemed off. I mean, it felt, misplaced. The mansion had 5 bedrooms in total, 4 on the ground floor and 1 upstairs, presumably the master suite. Well, that room, with its 2 large doors, however, was locked tight. Also next to the entrance of the master suite stood a table, atop which rested a small, intricately carved ivory box. I found it empty when I opened it, Only a faint trace of dust remained, but just enough to suggest it had once held a key. Now, the agency had been clear. The master suite required no housekeeping, no maintenance. We were free to use the other rooms as we pleased, but that one was strictly off limits. When I asked why, the answer was brief and vague. Just follow the terms of your contract. Setting aside my unease, Kathy and I spent the rest of the day unpacking, settling in, and trying to make the mansion feel like home. George casually explored from room to room, taking in his new surroundings, while Justine clung to her mother, wide-eyed and quiet. By the time we were done, our bodies ached with exhaustion. We sat down together and ate the sandwiches Kathy had packed that morning. Simple, familiar, but oddly comforting after a tiring day. Once the last crumbs were gone, we decided to call it a night. Kathy headed off to bed while I lingered in the hall for a quick smoke. As I leaned back in my chair, George wandered over, holding something in his hand. My tooth fell out, he mumbled, showing me the tiny incisor resting on his palm. He parted his lips and, sure enough, there was a fresh gap where his tooth had been. He didn't look too thrilled about it. You lost a tooth, huh, buddy? I asked, managing a faint smile. Did you make a wish for the tooth fairy? No, Dad. My friend Charlotte says that's silly. She told me there's a better way, he replied. Oh? I raised a brow, half amused, half wary. And, what's that? She says if you bury your tooth in the soil, George said, glancing toward the garden, something better grows in its place. I let out a dry chuckle. Your friend sounds like a smart lady. All right, let's give it a shot. Out in the garden, we stood in front of a tidy patch where carrots, bell peppers, tomatoes, and cucumbers were growing side by side. George crouched down, dug a small hole with his fingers, muttered a little prayer under his breath, placed the tooth inside, and neatly covered it with dirt. Back inside, I wished him good night and headed up to my room, where the moment my head hit the pillow, the exhaustion finally caught up with me. I was asleep before I even knew it. Well, I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but my eyes opened to a pitch-dark room, and for a moment I wasn't even sure what had stirred me, until I heard it again. A voice crackling through the baby monitor. Shh, don't wake her. He's still listening. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I sat up slowly, my body tense, my heart pounding in my ears. For a split second, I was frozen, my mind trying to rationalize what I'd just heard. Well, maybe I misheard. Maybe it was some strange frequency interference. Then the baby monitor crackled again. Oh, her hands are so small, so soft, so easy to hold. I bolted out of bed and rushed to Justine's room just across the hall. My breath caught in my throat, but as I reached the crib, I let out a shaky sigh. She was fast asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Swallowing my unease, I stepped into George's room next. He was curled under the blankets, his small frame peaceful and undisturbed. Nothing seemed out of place. I shook my head, forcing myself to finally breathe. Just my imagination. Stress, maybe. I really need to get some sleep. But as I closed George's door and turned back toward the hallway, a sharp knock echoed through the house. It came from the front door. I immediately stopped in my tracks. Well, the sound wasn't frantic, but it wasn't hesitant either. Just a steady, deliberate knock. 3 beats, a pause, and then 3 more. My pulse quickened. Who the hell would be knocking at this hour? Cautiously, I made my way toward the front hall. With every step, the air felt heavier, the silence of the house pressing in like a weight. I tried to peer through the windows flanking the door, but a thick mist had settled across the glass, distorting everything from the outside. Another knock. I hesitated, my fingers hovering just above the doorknob. The knocking continued at intermittent intervals, never urgent, but never stopping. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Stepping onto the front porch, I was met with nothing but silence. The night air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. I scanned the empty steps, the gravel driveway beyond, the towering trees lining the property. Nothing. No sign of anyone. And then my eyes drifted to the garden. The swings. A slow chill crawled up my spine. There were 3 of them hanging side by side from the wooden frame. The 2 on either end were perfectly still, untouched by the breeze. But the middle swing? It was moving. Not swaying gently, not rocking in place, but swinging back and forth, and steadily gaining momentum. My breath hitched as I took a cautious step forward. The swing cut through the air with an eerie smoothness, its arcs growing larger and larger, climbing higher with each pass. Soon it was reaching the very top of its arc before reversing, soaring just as high on the other side, and then it went completely over. The swing looped around the top bar, the chains twisting unnaturally, suspending upside down for a fraction of a second. That's when I heard it. A voice. A gleeful, disembodied woohoo. The sound echoed through the empty garden, playfully, almost taunting. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears, watching as the swing completed its impossible loop and then come back down. The seat thudded against the wooden frame, but even as it settled, it seemed poised to complete another unnatural rotation. Before my mind could process what I'd just witnessed, a voice from behind made me jolt. "What on earth are you doing out here at this hour, Tom?" I turned sharply to see Kathy standing in the doorway, her robe pulled tight against the night chill, her eyes heavy with sleep. Wordlessly, I pointed toward the swing, my breath still uneven. She followed my gaze, craning her neck to see. Then she turned back to me, her brows furrowed. "See what?" I whipped my head back toward the garden. The swing was still, perfectly still. All 3 hung in quiet harmony, swaying only slightly in the faint breeze. No wild arcs, no impossible loops, no phantom laughter. Kathy sighed, rubbing her arms against the cold. "You're exhausted," she murmured, reaching for my arm. "Come back inside before you freeze out here." I let her pull me back toward the house while I continued to look over my shoulder. As we stepped inside, I watched the door click shut behind me, and when I turned, Kathy was gone. My heart skipped a beat as I stood alone in the hallway trying to retrace her movements, even though I hadn't looked away for more than a second. Our bedroom was at least 15 feet away, too far for her to disappear without a trace. So I slowly walked towards our room and stopped by the open door only to find her fast asleep on her side of the bed, and this made my stomach churn and twist in confusion. Something really weird was going on here, and the silence pressing in around me only made my head throb. Part 2. That's when I heard it again. A sudden burst of static ripping through the air, followed by a voice crackling from the old radio tucked away in the corner. It was my little girl, Justine, breaking into a wail, her sobs echoing across the old, empty hall. Then I heard another voice, soft and syrupy, as if trying to pacify her, but something about the tone made my skin crawl. "There, little one. Hush now," the voice cooed, the words dragging out in a slow, breathy lull. You don't want to wake up the whole house now, do you? I didn't even bother to turn back and look at the old radio set. Instead, my feet instantly dragged me forward again toward Justine's room. I reached the room and I froze. The crib was empty. Heart pounding, I rushed in, scanning every inch, but she was nowhere. The room was empty. Justine's cries still cracked from the old radio, but now they sounded fainter, distant and broken, like they were being pulled away. Then came another sound, soft but distinct. Footsteps, slow, steady, and deliberate. I stood rooted in the doorway, watching the empty space ahead. No one appeared. Only the sound of invisible footsteps climbing higher and higher up the wooden stairs. With each step, the house grew quieter. Justine's cries fading, the footsteps softening until everything vanished into the darkness above, leaving me standing there in stunned silence. It took a few minutes for the panic to loosen its grip. Then clarity struck and I bolted up the stairs. When I reached the first floor, I noticed a faint sliver of light spilling in from the narrow gap between the two doors of the room. What truly caught my eye was the little ivory chest sitting on the side table, glowing with a faint green hue. Drawn toward it, I slowly approached the chest and lifted the lid. Inside was an old, elongated key, ornate and heavy, clearly meant for the locked door ahead. Well, a warning flickered in my mind, urging me to stop. But all I could think of was Justine. I shoved the thought away and picked up the key. My hands trembled as I slid it into the lock, twisting until I heard the soft click. I tightened my grip on the handle, exhaled slowly, and pushed the door open. Tom, wake up! Wake up! I jolted upright, gasping, the door still half open in my mind, only to see my wife's terrified face as she shook me awake. I blinked, disoriented, realizing I was still in bed, but Kathy's voice was sharp and panicked. Tom, get up! The kids! I can't find them! They're gone! She cried, clutching my shoulders. What? I mumbled, still trying to snap out of the fog. George and Justine, they're not in their beds, she said, practically dragging me out of bed. Right. Check the rooms again, then search the garden outside as well, I shouted, already out of bed and moving fast, not bothering to look back. I knew exactly where I needed to search first, but I didn't want Kathy following me. I quickly climbed the stairs, not knowing what I would find. Everything was still a blur, and I was beginning to question my own sanity. When I reached the top of the stairs, everything was just as I'd seen it the first time. The doors were locked tight, and the little ivory chest sat there closed with no key inside. Well, I almost threw myself at the door, ready to break it down, but then Kathy's voice called from the outside, stopping me in my tracks. Tom! Kathy's voice rang out, louder this time, cutting through everything. Out here! I found them! Well, I spun and bolted down the stairs, my heart pounding. Outside, Kathy was running ahead, breathless, pointing toward the meadow behind the mansion. There! She cried. I followed her gaze, and there, across the grass, sat a small figure. Without thinking, I sprinted toward the meadow, dread pressing down with every step. It was George, seated on the ground, holding Justine close, her head resting on his shoulder, fast asleep. Well, it was clear as day to me that he'd been watching over his sister all along. But Kathy, still shaken, was livid. George, do you have any idea how scared we were? She scolded him, her voice trembling as she gently lifted Justine from his arms. She's safe, Mom, George muttered quietly, his eyes still downcast. Kathy cradled Justine close and shot me a look. Let's get back inside, now. She turned back toward the house, but I stayed, unable to tear my eyes away from George. Several questions swarmed in my mind. Did he feel it too? The whispers, the strange dreams, the noises in the dark. And why this meadow of all places? Why not come to us? Before I could speak, George slowly stood, brushing the grass from his hands. "She told me to come here, Dad," he said softly. "She said we'd be safe here." "Who told you?" I asked. "Charlotte," he replied. Oh, my stomach dropped. "Charlotte, what? You mean your friend?" I asked, my voice low, barely hiding my disbelief. "She lives here?" George nodded his head in a matter-of-fact manner. "Yeah, she says she lives here, with her friends," he said, pointing toward the cluster of trees at the edge of the mansion. I told George to hurry back inside while I headed for those trees alone. When I stepped beneath a thick canopy, my heart started to race again as I found myself standing in the middle of a graveyard, with rows of crooked, weathered tombstones stretching in every direction. There were at least 50 of them. I stepped closer to one of the tombstones, dread coiling tighter with every step. I brushed the dirt from it and froze. It belonged to a child, and then another, and another. And pretty soon I realized every headstone bore a child's name, each with the same date of death. When I felt the weight of it sink in, it was cold and suffocating. And the longer I lingered, the heavier it felt, like the weight of unseen eyes pressing in from every direction. I could almost feel them staring, like I'd trespassed on their personal space. My skin crawled, and the back of my neck prickled, and the hair on my arm stood on end. I turned at once and hurried back to the mansion, my mind blank, my thoughts spinning. The moment I stepped inside, the world suddenly seemed untouched by what I'd just seen. Justine was fast asleep in her crib. Kathy was in the kitchen, humming faintly as she stirred a pot, while George sat in his room calmly sketching his colouring book, acting as if nothing had happened. Well, he'd always been a strange kid, quiet, content to be by himself, not easily rattled. It wasn't that he was pretending to be brave, he was simply made that way. And that made him more accepting of the world around him, even if it didn't always make sense. "Hey, tell me more about your friend Charlotte, George," I said, sitting next to him on his bed. George quietly closed his colouring book, walked to his cupboard, and pulled something from beneath the loose floorboards, an old worn photo frame holding a yellowed photograph. It was a group photo, rows of children, some as young as 6, others in their teens, all dressed in old-fashioned clothes, posing stiffly for the camera. Macy's Orphanage, the faded letters at the bottom read, along with the year, 1946. In the center sat a middle-aged man with a thick handlebar moustache, staring solemnly ahead, his hands resting on a cane. George held the photo out toward me, his small finger hovering over a girl in the front row, around 6 or 7, her hair neatly parted, wearing a plain dress. Her eyes locked straight onto the camera. They were unblinking, cold, almost piercing. Even in the faded photo, her stare seemed to reach right through the paper. That's her, Dad," George said softly. "Charlotte." I swallowed hard, not sure how to react. For starters, my kid had apparently made friends with a ghost, and he was being oddly calm about it. All this while, I was thinking she was probably his crush from school. Well, a ghost. And if I was hearing this right, a ghost who'd been giving him survival tips in this even more strange and terrifying mansion. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought popped up. Well, yes, useful connections around here isn't the worst thing. Yet. But before I could process it all, George casually pointed to the empty chair just a few feet away. "Hey, she's right here," he said, flashing an innocent smile. almost happy, as if Charlotte was about to make another friend. But my panic spiked. Here I was, trying to have a serious heart-to-heart moment between father and son, while a ghost sat right there listening in, mere inches away. And then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. George's tooth. The one that had fallen out last night. It was back, perfectly in place, as if it had never fallen out at all. George, that tooth of yours, the one we buried last night. You remember, don't you? I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady even as my mind reeled. George's tongue instinctively poked at the spot, searching for the gap. Then he touched the tooth with his own finger, and realization slowly dawned on him for the first time. I watched, almost like it was in slow motion, as his innocent smile faded, replaced instead by confusion and, for the first time, registering a flicker of fear. Then, suddenly, a sharp cry rang out from the kitchen. Ah! I bolted toward it and found Kathy frozen near the counter, her face drained of color, her eyes locked on the blender. Inside, swirling around crushed tomatoes, were teeth. Dozens of them, old, new, tiny and large, all floating together in the thick red pulp. She let out a strangled gasp as she hugged me. I couldn't even find my voice. George quietly held my hand, and when I looked down at him, his attention was elsewhere, his hand pointing at a wall close to the kitchen window. My blood ran cold as I saw Charlotte for the first time, not in flesh or spirit, but as a dark shadow cast against the wall by the morning sun filtering through the curtains, revealing a small girl cupping both hands to her mouth, silently giggling away with unrestrained glee. Well, I stood there, staring in open-mouthed horror, too slow to react, as Kathy turned to see what had caught my gaze. One glance was all it took. Her knees buckled as she collapsed unconscious into my arms. I quickly carried her back to the hall and eased her into a chair, while George hurried over with a glass of water. I sprinkled some on her face, and slowly she began to stir. I stole a quick glance back toward the kitchen, just to be sure, but the shadow was gone. Justine thankfully remained fast asleep in her crib, blissfully unaware of the chaos. And George sat quietly beside us, giving me a small, knowing nod, his silent way of confirming Charlotte was no longer in our midst. Kathy then suddenly jolted awake, looking around frantically. Tom, what's happening? What did I see? What's going on here? I gently held her shoulders, steadying her as she tried to sit up. Listen, honey. I don't know exactly, I admitted, keeping my voice low but firm. But you're right, this place isn't right. I felt it too. Something's going on here, and whatever it is, it's not safe. Her face went pale. Before she could spiral again, I cupped her face with my palms. Right, look at me, I said, calm but firm. We're not staying here. We're leaving. Today. I don't care what it takes. I'm not letting another thing happen to you or the kids, okay? Kathy gave a shaky nod, clinging to my every word. Without wasting another second, I grabbed my phone, scrolled the emergency number the agency had provided, and hit call. Well, the line picked up on the first ring, but there was only silence on the other end. Yeah, this is Tom, I said, my voice steady. We're done here. We're leaving today. The line paused for a second before going dead. Then a few seconds later, I received a text on my phone. Your replacement arrives at 7 p.m. Be packed and ready. You'll leave with the car on its return trip. Now, I won't lie. I let out a huge sigh of relief. I'd expected resistance, maybe some vague threats or pushback from the agency, but none came. Part of me wondered if they'd been expecting this call all along. I turned to Kathy and gave her a small nod. A flicker of relief crossed her face, and we immediately got to work, packing our things in hurried silence, stuffing bags with whatever we could grab. Neither of us said it aloud, but we both knew. We just needed to make it to 7 o'clock. Part 3. And just to be safe, we moved Justine's crib into our room, and even George quietly climbed into our bed without protest. Kathy and I sat together in silence, watching, waiting. Eventually her eyes fluttered shut. She eased down beside the kids and drifted off to sleep. I remained in the chair, determined to keep watch. But time dragged, each minute stretching endlessly. The more I stared at the clock, the slower it seemed to move. My eyes grew heavier, my head starting to droop. Before I knew it, I'd fallen asleep. When I stirred awake, my neck stiff and aching, the light in the room had turned a pale gold. The clock on the wall read 6:02 p.m. and the sun's final rays were barely holding onto the horizon. But the bed beside me was empty. Justine's crib stood still and silent. The covers on the bed were rumpled, abandoned. Kathy was gone, and so was George. I shot up, knocking the chair over. "Kathy," I called, my voice cracking. "George!" The house swallowed their names like they were never meant to echo. No answer. I ran to the adjacent rooms, flinging open doors. Nothing. Bathroom, empty. Kitchen, undisturbed. I checked the hallway, the back porch, even the laundry room. Silence. The packed bags were still there by the door, exactly where we'd left them. Unmoved, untouched. This can't be happening. I pinched the inside of my forearm hard, so hard I felt the skin break. Blood welled up in a tiny crimson bead. Damn, I was awake. I rushed inside, scanning the garden, my eyes darting toward the swings, but they hung lifeless. I ran to the meadow, somehow hoping to find my family resting there. No luck. I even circled back to the grave at the edge of the property, but they were not there. Oh, dread settled deep in my chest. By the time I stumbled back to the front porch, the sun was gone. Night had fallen, and shadows pressed against the windows. Well, there was only one place left. I'd been avoiding it all this time, but now I couldn't. I grabbed a crowbar from the tool shed outside and stepped back into the house when the old radio in the hall hissed to life with a crackle. "Oh, someone seems to be in a tearing hurry," a voice bellowed from the radio. "Planning to break down doors now, are you, Tom? You really think that's going to get you the outcome you want?" But I didn't stop. I stormed upstairs and swung the crowbar with everything I had. Blow after blow, I attacked the door until my arms screamed in protest. But it was useless. The wood didn't even splinter. It was like striking solid metal. And then the radio hissed back to life. Only this time it was George's voice. Mom, where do you think Dad is? Oh, I don't feel so good. When can we get out of here? Are we gonna die?" Kathy's voice followed, worried but doing her best to stay strong. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything's gonna be okay. Your dad will find us. He'll get us out of here," she assured him. And the radio cut to silence. I stood motionless, a tear rolling down my cheek. I let the crowbar fall from my hand, and it slowly descended the stairs and sat at the base, hollow and numb. "God damn it. What do you want from me?" I asked at last, my eyes still fixed on the floor. "I want your time, Tom. All 5 years of it, just like it says in your contract," the voice replied. "So, there's no replacement coming at 7 today, is there?" I asked, the words dry in my mouth. "Oh, I'm afraid not, Tom," the voice answered, almost sounding sympathetic. "Who are you?" I asked, finally turning to face the voice. Why, Mr. Whitaker, the caretaker of this mansion. My mind flicked to the photograph. Wait, you were the man seated with the children in that old picture George came across. Oh, I'm afraid not, the voice replied. That was the warden. He ran the orphanage that once operated here many years ago. From what I've heard, he wasn't a kind man. The voice crackled, then continued. Stories still linger about how he treated the children. Strict isolation, enforced silence, days without food. Discipline, he believed, was best maintained through fear. When that failed, the cane did the talking, which by all accounts was nearly every day. Well, things got so bad that one day somebody messed with his favorite radio and it would no longer work. Bereft of any auditory comfort, the warden, in an effort to nab the culprits, unleashed a wave of torment on the children that lasted for weeks, so depraved it changed them permanently. From that point on, the warden was a marked man, and it was only a matter of time before his end came. Well, it started with a bowl of soup laced with rat poison. As the warden rocked back and forth in his chair, clutching at his throat and foaming at the mouth, a dozen or so children came at him from all sides like feral dogs, ripping into him with whatever they could find. Cleavers, forks, skewers, even rolling pins. The ensuing carnage was so graphic that it led the remaining staff members to flee, never to return, leaving the children in charge of the mansion and their own destiny. However, expecting a group of children to administrate and delegate responsibility was easier said than done. With no common enemy to confront, they soon began to turn on each other. One chaotic night, a gas leak went unnoticed during a brawl, and a section of the building erupted in flames, claiming the lives of everyone left inside. And since then, their spirits have never left Tom. They still roam these grounds. The voice finished then, dissolving into static once again. A long silence settled over the hall before I finally spoke. Well, as unfortunate as this is, what does any of this have to do with me, Mr. Whitaker? And if you're already the caretaker, then why bring me here to do the same job? I asked, my patience wearing thin. I can't fulfill the role in full, Tom, he replied. I exist only as a bridge between this world and the other. But I need someone living, flesh and blood, to carry out what must be done here. Which is what exactly? I snapped, trying to keep my anger in check. To help them find freedom, Tom, Mr. Whitaker replied after a pause, his tone calm and matter-of-fact. I stumbled back a step as if the weight of his words had physically struck me. No, this wasn't the deal, I muttered, shaking my head as I began pacing at the foot of the stairs. This is not what I signed up for. I was told caretaker duties, maintenance, oversight. Not this, I said, my hands running through my hair, fingers tugging at the roots. You can't just spring this on me. You can't expect me to deal with angry ghosts and trapped souls just by waving a contract in my face. I stopped mid-step, my eyes darting as if the walls themselves were listening now. But do you know what truly scares me more than even the ghosts, Mr. Whitaker? I asked, my voice just about steady. It's that I don't even know what's happening anymore. Don't know if I'm awake or dreaming. Don't know if any of this is real or just some kind of nightmare I haven't woken up from. I can't distinguish between the past and present. It's like they're all running in parallel. I whipped around to the radio, my eyes wild. Come on. What the hell is this place? There was a long pause in the hall, almost as if Mr. Whitaker was carefully choosing his response. The radio crackled back to life a few moments later, his voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence. Think of it like reading a book, Tom. When you read, the words leave an imprint on your mind, creating a sort of duplicate, a memory. You internalize it, interpret it, and process it. Depending on its impact and your own conditioning based on your personal life experiences, it might inspire action, might even shape your perception of the past, present, or future. Or it might do none of those things and simply remain a memory. But tell me, Tom, just because you've created a copy of that book in your mind, does the real physical book cease to exist? Of course not. Both versions exist side by side. Well, with time, you'll learn to navigate this place and fulfill the task expected of you. But the more important thing for you to understand is that there are rules here. As the caretaker, you're assigned to help only one child earn her freedom. That child is Charlotte. Do you see any other beings hovering in the hallways of this mansion? No, right? That's because if there's one thing everyone here has learned, it's to wait their turn. And that makes your job much easier. The sooner you help her, the sooner you can leave. Mr. Whittaker's voice trailed off into static once more. Well, I just stood there motionless, feeling completely lost. But I knew I was trapped, and it was looking increasingly difficult to talk my way out of this. What happens to my family? I finally asked. They'll be fine, Tom, as long as you hold up your end of the bargain, Mr. Whittaker replied. What if I refuse? I dared, finding myself staring at the old radio set. There was a complete pin-drop silence in the hall, while I could feel a bead of sweat roll down my forehead. Then the large knob of the radio set started turning clockwise automatically, as the radio burst into a wave of static again. But this time it was George's voice, sharp and alarmed. Mom, what's behind you? A pause then, more static, and then a sudden scraping distortion surged through the speaker, followed by Kathy's gasp. Stay behind me, George. Justine. And then chaos. Their screams tore through the hall, wild, frantic, as if something immense and monstrous was closing in on them. George shrieked, his terror raw and unfiltered, while Kathy's cries twisted into panicked commands and broken sobs. Little Justine began wailing in the background, her sobs cutting through it like needles. I dropped to my knees. No, please, I cried, my hands clenched in my hair. Stop this. Stop it, please. And then, silence again. The knob on the radio, which had been turning steadily on its own, clicked to a halt, and everything stilled. A moment later, Mr. Whittaker's voice returned, calm and low. Rise, Tom. I hesitated, still shaking, but slowly got to my feet. I want you to say it in your own words, that you're ready to take on your role. I swallowed hard, wiped my face with my sleeve. I'm ready, I said, my voice hoarse but certain. I'll do it. Good, Mr. Whittaker replied. Now step forward and return the dial to its original position. I approached the radio, placed my hand on the worn brass dial and slowly turned it counterclockwise. Well, it resisted slightly, then gave way, clicking back into place until it wouldn't turn any more. The room grew deathly quiet, like it was holding its breath, and then Mr. Whittaker finally spoke again. Now go on, Tom. Go upstairs and meet your family. Well, I didn't wait. I rushed up the stairs, my heart pounding, and reached the large doors. The key was already in the lock, turned. I gripped the handle, pushed the doors open, and stepped inside. The air was warm, tinged with the faint scent of antiseptic and talcum powder. A television murmured softly in the background. George was sitting on the edge of the bed, his legs swinging idly as he watched his favorite cartoon. 2 suitcases sat zipped and ready in the corner next to him. Kathy stood nearby in a beautiful floral dress facing the crib, gently rocking it with one hand, her eyes fixed on her newborn daughter. The scene hit me like a wave. I knew this day. I'd lived this day. It was the day Kathy was discharged from the hospital after giving birth. Kathy suddenly turned toward me, her eyes lighting up when she saw me at the doorway. Took you long enough, she said with a tired smile, glancing at the paper in my hand. Why do hospitals take so long to get billing done? I looked down, and there it was, crumpled slightly but unmistakable. The discharge receipt, the ink still fresh. She nodded toward me, her expression softening. "Come here. Stand next to me." "You know, Tom," she began as I walked over, still rocking the crib gently, "we've been going back and forth the past few days, and I was dead against your idea at first." She paused, lifting the baby with practiced ease, resting the bundle against her shoulder. "But now I have to say, I like it. In fact, I like it very much." She looked down at the baby then, her voice warm and certain. "Dear Charlotte," she whispered, brushing her fingers over the baby's cheek. "Yes, sweetie pie, that's what Mom and Dad have decided to call you. Took its time, but it's been worth the while. Don't you think?" She looked at me smiling while I awkwardly smiled back. A few minutes later, we all prepared to leave. George slid off the bed and walked ahead without needing a word. Kathy followed with Charlotte tucked close to her chest, wrapped in a soft blanket. I paused at the door, suitcases in hand, my eyes fixed on the threshold like it might shift or vanish beneath me. I took a breath, then slowly lifted one leg and stepped over. The instant my foot landed, I expected to be back in the cold mansion, but I found myself standing in the corridor of a busy hospital. Ahead of me, Kathy continued to move briskly, Charlotte in her arms. George turned to glance back and gave me a grin before pushing open the double doors at the end. We emerged into the sunlight of the hospital parking lot. Kathy climbed into the back seat with Charlotte, carefully adjusting her dress as she cradled the infant. George slid into the front passenger seat beside me. As I got behind the wheel, I glanced into the rearview mirror. Charlotte was nestled comfortably in Kathy's arms, but her eyes, those tiny unblinking eyes, were staring straight at me through the mirror, locked in. For a long, impossible moment, she didn't blink. And then she closed her eyes, slowly and deliberately, a silent gesture of completion. I gave the faintest nod in return, because I understood. Then I looked at my own reflection in the mirror. God, I looked tired and worn out. But at the same time, I could hear a voice, excited, echoing louder and louder in my mind with each passing second. "Well done, Mr. Whitaker. Well done. Freedom at last." I started the car, turned on the radio and started driving. Meanwhile, George sat silently, his eyes fixed on the radio, his face serious and contemplative. His fingers rose absent-mindedly to his front teeth. He touched his incisor and paused. Something about it bothered him. And then the radio flared into static. A deep, ragged voice burst through. "Son, help me, son. Help me." Well, my dear friends, it has been a long time since I've done an old-school haunted house kind of story, and I kind of missed it. Really enjoyed that one. Hope you did as well. Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video. And as ever, I will do my best to join in the conversation, as I tend to do, and you know I do listen to feedback from you all. And let me just click away to the previous video. Just give me a second, because I got one of the most incredible constructive feedback comments I've ever received from public speaking work, so thank you very much. Long-time listener, gave me a lot of things to think about, and I do not take this badly, I never do. So if there's something you say, well, why are you doing that, or don't do that, then I do really take it to heart and think, okay, this is what people prefer. Alright, so yeah, the background images, it's always just like, well, I'm here to tell a story. There's just something going on in the background in case, you happen to be watching it as well, but that's never been the main part of what I do here. So, yeah, the AI stuff, a lot of people liked it, but there were a lot of people saying, what are you doing this? And I just thought, well, I wasn't really that comfortable ever with using AI-generated footage, even though it was often a lot closer to what was going on in the story than what I can do just going out with my GoPro camera. So, this is a bit of an extended housekeeping bit at the end. So the story's finished. Feel free to, switch over now. Nothing else going on apart from me waffling for a bit. Yeah, the background music as well. I have that kind of creepy drone going on, which I use quite a lot. I do have about 80 pieces of music I composed. Actually, before I started reading stories, I thought, well, I'm going to compose creepy horror music for other people to do this. And then nobody really was interested. I'm like, well, I may as well use them myself. So I do have about 80 pieces of music, and I think long-term listeners will know which ones are my favourite. But yeah, if you want more variety, then let me know. And in terms of sound effects, I always felt I was quite pompous in my attitude. It's like, well, if I'm a good enough storyteller, I shouldn't need to say, oh, and then the door opened, clunk. It should just be enough. Or yeah, then the gun fired, boom. Okay, but if you think that enhances the quality of the story, let me know again, and I will act accordingly. All right, anything else I want to say? Really good comments. So that's on the previous video, the first half of the Wormwood Murders saga. More of that to come next week. You're going to love the end of that one. So another hour and a half to add on to that story next week. Anyway, yeah, that comment is pinned to the top of the Wormwood Murders video from Wednesday evening. So please take a look if there's anything you'd like to add to that. Because I always just, I'm doing this because I enjoy reading stories, but I enjoy reading stories for you to listen to. So if you're not enjoying them as much as you would, please let me know. All right, waffle over. Thanks as ever for listening. I'll be back again very, very soon. Till the next time, my dear friends, remember it's only a story and you sleep well, yeah?